The word slammed into me harder than a fist. Freeloader. My father, Richard Bennett, spat across the dinner table as if the roast chicken between us had given him the right. His face was red, the veins in his neck stiff, and his voice cut straight through the clatter of dishes. He didn't stop there. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing on me, then flicking toward my 12-year-old son. You and your kid are just freeloaders. My mother, Patricia Bennett, sat to his right, lips curling into a smirk so thin it could slice glass. She didn't repeat the word, but her silence was worse. She lifted her glass, nodded once, as if confirming the verdict. At that moment, I understood what side she had always been on, across the table. My brother, Mark Bennett, strolled in late, phone still in his hand, jacket slung carelessly over his chair. He didn't even need to ask what was happening. He looked at me, then at my father, then chuckled under his breath. "Dad's right," he said, pulling the bread basket toward him as if this were nothing more than another family ritual. The irony burned so sharp I could taste it. This dinner wasn't happening in their house. It wasn't in the home where I had grown up, or even in some neutral restaurant. We were sitting in my dining room, in the home I had worked years to buy, the mortgage paid with every long hour I had survived. And yet, here they were, calling me a parasite in the very space I had opened to them. I didn't shout back. I didn't slam my hands on the table the way Richard wanted. Instead, I turned to my son. Ethan Bennett sat beside me, his fork paused mid-air, eyes wide but silent. I placed my hand gently over his. My voice was steady, lower than the storm circling me. "We're done here," I said. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood filled the room. I felt 3 pairs of eyes on me, my father's fury, my mother's disdain, my brother's amusement, but I didn't give them more words. I led Ethan away from the table without looking back. Why didn't I defend myself right there? Because this wasn't the first time my family had taken something from me, and it would not be the last. I was 18 the summer my world split open. The acceptance letter from the University of Kentucky was pinned above my desk. Edges curled from where I'd touched it too often. Computer science, labs, professors, a chance to build something beyond the narrow streets of Louisville. For once, I felt like the future was mine to claim. Then the call came from the living room. Richard Bennett, my father, stood by the mantel with his arms crossed, face carved into stone. Patricia Bennett, my mother, hovered near him, eyes darting between the carpet and my face. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides a knife. "We need your inheritance," Richard said, voice flat as a weather forecast. My chest tightened, for what Patricia stepped in quickly, as if rehearsed. "Your brother is starting a construction business with your father. Mark just needs some capital to get moving. It's a sure thing. You'll get it back." Mark Bennett wasn't even in the room. He didn't need to be. They spoke for him as they always did. I clutched the letter in my hand, the paper softening under my grip. What about my college? That money was for tuition. Grandpa wanted me to. "You can get loans, Laura." Richard cut me off. "This is for the family. Family." That word had weight in his mouth, but it was never meant for me, in that house. Family was a code name for Mark. The money disappeared within weeks. The business collapsed within a year. There was no repayment, no apology, not even acknowledgement of what they had taken. My future had been gambled away like pocket change. I packed quietly one August night, a duffel bag with 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, my laptop, and the $500 I had saved from summer shifts at the grocery store. No one tried to stop me. No one asked where I was going. The screen door creaked behind me, and then I was in the heavy air of a Louisville night, dragging my bag across cracked sidewalks. Streetlights buzzed overhead, throwing orange halos on the pavement. Houses on either side glowed with family laughter, but none of it was mine. Every step felt like a declaration if they wouldn't stand with me. I would stand alone. The apartment I found smelled of dust and stale noodles. Rent was shared with two strangers who barely spoke to me. My mattress sat on the floor, thin sheets stretched across poking springs. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned, not handed. College was brutal. Classes drained me by day, jobs consumed me by night. Waitressing, stocking shelves, tutoring, the hours bled together. My body often folded into bed without dinner, running on caffeine and scraps of determination. Ramen stretched across weeks. Textbooks were heavier than groceries. Bills landed like tests I couldn't fail. I lived without a safety net. No one called to check if I'd eaten. No one wired money when rent was due. The silence was absolute, and in it I discovered a grim kind of resilience. By the time I graduated, top of my class, the acceptance letter had yellowed above my desk like a relic. I crossed the stage to strangers clapping. No family in the stands, no one shouting my name. But inside, I clapped for myself. I thought then that I had seen the worst my parents could take from me. I believed that losing my inheritance, my chance at an easier life, was the final theft. I was wrong. The apartment was small, walls cracked with age, but it was mine. My mattress rested on the floor, pressed against a window that leaked winter air, and every morning I woke to the rumble of buses outside. Dust clung to the blinds, and the kitchen carried the faint smell of instant noodles. Still, I told myself, this was freedom. Days belonged to lectures and computer labs. Nights were a blur of work. I waited tables until my legs shook, stocked shelves until dawn, and squeezed in tutoring sessions for kids whose parents paid more in an hour than I made all week. My body never truly rested. Some nights I collapsed still in uniform, shoes on, head sinking into the mattress springs. Coffee became my bloodline, ramen my ritual. The acceptance letter, now yellowing at the corners, stayed pinned above my desk. I looked at it when the exhaustion felt endless. It reminded me why I couldn't quit. If my parents had stolen my inheritance, I would build another future with nothing but my own hands. Loneliness was my shadow. When storms rolled across the city and the lights flickered, no one checked my door. When rent was due, no voice asked if I needed help. My parents called maybe twice a year, their words hollow, their interest brief. Patricia's voice always tilted toward Mark's new big idea. Richard never asked how I was surviving. The silence became my teacher. In that quiet, I found a rhythm no one could take. I studied through nights others wasted, coding until the screen blurred. Anger kept me awake. Pride kept me moving. When graduation finally came, I was gaunt, exhausted, but undefeated. I crossed the stage, diploma in hand, top of my class. The cheers in the auditorium weren't for me, but I clapped for myself inside. The degree opened doors. An entry-level job in tech turned into a steady paycheck, then a promotion. Steadiness replaced scarcity. Real meals replaced noodles. For the first time, I breathed without debt pressing against my ribs. Piece by piece, I paid the loans, cleared the balances, stacked hope into savings. I even let myself believe in stability again. I married a colleague sharp, funny, dependable, or so I thought. For a while, life looked steady, safe, but betrayal found me where I least expected it. Late nights at the office turned into secret texts, months of cheating hidden behind casual smiles. I didn't beg, I didn't cry. I packed his bags, handed him the handle, and shut the door. He stayed in Ethan's life with checks and scheduled visits, but he no longer stood in mine. I stayed upright, harder than before, determined that my son would never know the kind of abandonment I had endured. I had learned to leave men who betrayed me, parents, though parents were harder. It was a Tuesday evening when the phone rang. Ethan was bent over his homework at the kitchen table, pencil scratching across lined paper, while dinner cooled on the stove. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Patricia Bennett. My mother's voice cracked the moment I answered. "Laura, it's your father." She rushed. "Richard is sick, really sick, and the bank is foreclosing. 300,000 owed." The number sat heavy in my chest. 300,000. Different year, same script, bad ventures, endless debts, and always the plea for rescue. "What do you want me to do?" My voice was flat. "You're doing so well," Patricia pressed, layering her tone with desperation. "Your family. Help us." That word again. Family. It burned hotter than fire. I hung up before guilt could dig its claws too deep. But even after, the silence hummed loud. Part of me whispered, "Let them drown." Another part, the child still aching for closure, hesitated. I packed a small bag and arranged for Ethan to stay with a neighbor. I didn't go to save them. I went to close the chapters left unfinished. Louisville greeted me with peeling paint and overgrown grass. The Bennett house looked smaller now, weaker, its strength stripped bare. Cookie-scented afternoons from childhood had faded into mildew and dust. Inside, Richard Bennett lay on the couch, frail but still carrying stubborn fire in his eyes. Patricia ushered me in with a brittle smile painted to resemble gratitude. The air smelled of old coffee and desperation, over chipped mugs. She leaned closer. "You could fix this," she said. "Cover at least 200,000. It's the least you can do for family." Her voice trembled, but her expectation stood firm. I set the cup down. "Steady. That's a lot of money. I have Ethan. I have responsibilities." Richard's eyes narrowed, voice sharp as ever. "You've always been selfish. We gave you everything. Everything. They had stolen my inheritance, gambled my future, left me with nothing at 18. Now I was selfish for refusing to bail them out." The front door creaked open. Mark Bennett entered, smirk ready, phone still in his hand. He didn't bother to sit before delivering his line. "Don't play the victim, Laura. Step up or watch us sink." The words rolled off his tongue like entitlement had been his first language. My fists curled under the table, blood simmering. I thought the worst they could take was money. Then they came for my son. The conversation dragged like rusted hinges until my mother finally leaned back, eyes glinting cold. She studied me the way a gambler studies a losing hand, then spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "You and your son are just freeloaders living off our sacrifices." The insult landed sharper than any debt, because this time it wasn't aimed at me alone. It was aimed at Ethan Bennett, my 12-year-old boy who had nothing to do with their broken ventures, nothing to do with the inheritance they had stolen years before. He was the one person I had sworn to protect from exactly this kind of cruelty. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my voice stayed steady. I rose from the chair, the legs scraping against the kitchen tile, the sound louder than any argument I could have made. "Do not use my child to open my wallet." Patricia Bennett scoffed, lips curved like knives. Richard Bennett stared from the couch, his eyes daring me to bend the way I had at 18. Mark Bennett pretended boredom, scrolling his phone, a smirk tugging the corners of his mouth. Their silence pressed against me harder than shouting ever could. I looked at each of them once, then turned toward the door. My heart hammered, but my steps were calm. Protecting Ethan meant removing him from their poison, not trading blows in their kitchen. Outside, the air was sharp with the bite of early autumn. I dialed Susan Miller, the one friend who had seen me through sleepless semesters and custody papers. My voice wavered only once. They called Ethan a freeloader. There was silence on her end, then her words cut clear. "They're using you. Hold the line. Don't let guilt own you." I gripped the phone tighter, steadying myself against her certainty. For years, my parents had bet on my silence. They wanted a fight under their roof, a scene where I would shout, cry, and fold the way they expected. But this time, I chose differently. I walked away from the house, bag in hand, each step deliberate, behind me, the door shut, but the echo carried farther than I wanted to admit. They thought they had seen me bend. They thought wrong. The morning after I left, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts stacked on top of each other, coworkers, neighbors, even Ethan's basketball coach. "Have you seen this?" When I opened the link, there she was, Patricia Bennett, framed in the glow of a shaky phone camera, tissue crumpled in her hand. Her voice quivered on command as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Our daughter," she sniffled, "is letting us lose everything. After all we gave her, after all we sacrificed." The comments scrolled faster than I could read. Heartless, selfish, cruel. The video had been reposted, stitched, passed around until strangers thought they knew my story better than I did. For a moment, I felt the old guilt claw at my chest. But then I remembered Ethan's face at that dinner table, frozen under the weight of my father's insult. That memory hardened me more than any smear ever could. I called Susan Miller, voice cold. "They've gone public. They want a circus." She said, "Don't give them one." She was right. Rage would only feed their narrative. I needed something quieter, stronger. That afternoon, I sat across from Catherine Hayes, a lawyer whose suits were as sharp as her words. She laid out the facts on her desk like surgical instruments. The bank didn't care about family drama. They cared about numbers. Richard and Patricia owed too much, paid too little, and foreclosure was imminent. "You can step in," Catherine said. "Buy the property before it hits auction. It won't be cheap, but it's manageable with your savings and a loan. Once the deed's in your name, you control the terms. No more shouting matches, just signatures." Her calmness steadied me. Legal documents didn't smirk. Contracts didn't call children freeloaders. For the first time, I saw a way to fight without lifting my voice. I signed the preliminary papers with a steady hand. The house that had once been used against me could soon belong to me. Entirely. If Patricia thought tears on TikTok could break me, she had underestimated the silence of ink on paper. The day I signed the closing papers, the sky over Louisville was the color of steel. Inside the bank office, the air smelled faintly of toner and coffee, steady and impersonal. I sat across from the loan officer, pen in hand, and wrote my name on line after line until the last page was done. When I looked up, the deed was mine. The house that had been their fortress of control now answered to me alone. Catherine Hayes slid a folder across the desk, her tone precise. "We'll send this certified occupancy agreement. 5 years maximum. Structured repayment. Fair interest. They miss a payment. They vacate. No arguments. No theatrics." I opened the folder, scanning each clause. The language was clear, unshakable. I could almost hear Patricia trying to twist it, Mark trying to smirk his way through it, Richard trying to bark it down, but paper didn't bend to voices. That evening, the first call came. My mother's voice shook with fury, stripped of the softness she had displayed online. "You think you can control us with your papers? You'll regret this, Laura." I let the silence hang before ending the call. Later, a text from Mark Bennett lit my screen. "You're ruthless." 3 dots blinked, then vanished. No reply followed. I placed the phone face down and turned toward Ethan, who was piecing together a Lego ship at the dining table. He looked up once, curious, but I only smiled faintly and returned to my cup of tea. Some battles didn't need to be explained. They thought blood gave them leverage. They thought guilt was still my chain, but now the terms were written, and they were mine. ChatGPT said they didn't sign. The certified envelope returned unopened. The agreement rejected without a word. For a moment, the old ache threatened to surface 18 again, told my future wasn't mine to keep. But this time, I had a different weapon. Catherine Hayes moved swiftly. A notice to quit. 30 days, delivered by the book. No shouting, no doorstep confrontations, no slammed phones, just documents with legal weight heavier than any insult. I kept a log of everything, the angry voicemails from Patricia Bennett, the midnight texts from Mark, the vague threats Richard barked through background coughs. Each message saved, time-stamped, cataloged, evidence, not wounds. When co-workers forwarded the latest smear posts, I didn't answer with rage. I filed them away. I knew courts didn't care about TikTok tears, they cared about records. At night, Ethan would sometimes look at me over his homework. "Are the storms over?" he asked once. His voice so quiet it almost broke me. "Not yet," I told him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "But we've got a map now." He nodded, trusting, and bent back over his pencil. I watched his small shoulders steady themselves in a way mine never could at his age. That was the difference. He had me. Days passed, each one inching toward the deadline. I didn't pace the floor. I prepared. Documents organized, emails saved, calendar marked. Boundaries, not begging. They had chosen refusal. I had chosen law. And this time, the weight of choice belonged to me. 30 days later, the house stood hollow. Curtains dangled from bent rings, boxes half-packed in the corners, the smell of mildew stronger than ever. They hadn't left gently, but they had left. No voices rose from the kitchen, no footsteps pressed into the worn carpet. The silence inside was the loudest I had ever heard it. I walked through slowly, room by room. The living room where Richard once barked orders sat stripped bare, only the imprint of furniture left behind. The kitchen where Patricia had called Ethan a freeloader smelled of old grease and stale air. Mark's shoes no longer cluttered the hallway. I turned the lock with a deliberate hand. This time, I wasn't sneaking out with a duffel bag and $500. I was standing in a house that was mine, watching the ghosts of their presence fade with every step. There were no speeches to make, no revenge to savor. Memories rose like unwanted guests, trying to bargain with me holidays around a decorated tree, Sunday dinners before the shouting began. I let them speak and then let them dissolve. I called a cleaning crew the next morning. Windows opened wide, sunlight cut through the stale rooms, and the air shifted from heavy to clear. Locks were changed, the key cool in my palm, smooth against skin that had once blistered from carrying bags away at 18. I stood in the doorway one last time, listening to the creak of the frame. The house no longer held me. It never would again. A week later, laughter filled the halls again, but not theirs. A young couple signed the lease, hands brushing nervously as they scrawled their names across the pages. They talked about paint colors, about where to put the crib they would need in a few months. Their voices carried lightly through rooms that had once been weighed down by accusation and debt. The rent flowed directly into Ethan's $529 college account. Each transfer felt like more than money. It felt like justice. The same house that had stolen my future now promised my son his. I drove past the property one last time before heading home. The windows stared back, hollow, stripped of their power. I didn't stop to imagine holidays or family dinners. I whispered a goodbye, not to Richard or Patricia, but to the girl I had been at 18, the one dragging a duffel bag down cracked sidewalks, believing she was disposable. She wasn't disposable. She had become me. At home. Ethan waited with a packet of marigold seeds clutched in his small hand. "Let's plant them today," he said, eyes bright. Together we knelt in the yard, soil damp under our palms, the air cool with the promise of spring. As we pressed the seeds into earth, he looked up and asked, "Are the storms over now?" I paused, brushing dirt from my fingers. "Storms come and go," I told him softly, "but we don't live under them. Not anymore." His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, I saw him breathe without the weight of their words. Later, inside, I opened a drawer and pulled out the deed. My name stood alone at the bottom, crisp and final. I showed it to Ethan. Strength isn't shouting. I said, it's choosing when to stay and when to leave. Choosing respect over approval every time. He traced the letters of my name with his finger, his face serious. So, family isn't always blood, I met his eyes. Family is who shows up kindly, who holds your line when you're tired, who celebrates your no as much as your yes. That evening, the marigolds sat in their bed of soil, waiting for light. Ethan leaned against me, tired but content. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle around us. It wasn't the silence of neglect anymore. It was peace. I thought of my parents' numbers, blocked, their voicemails, archived, their house. No longer theirs. The chapter was closed, and the door stays locked.